Hello guys, and welcome back to another Marc Harvill art painting tutorial. Working on a 18 by 24 canvas here, and I'm just adding some gray. This is like just a dark gray I've mixed together with some umber and blue and some black. So what I'm doing here, I let that dry completely, and of course we're working in acrylics, and I apologize for the camera. I was having a little bit of camera problems with getting the camera to focus properly, and I'm also still working in my dining room. Part of the reason for that is my son came home from college for the holidays, and we had a house full of folks, and so I had to put him in my little studio office where I typically paint. So I was kind of required to get out and into the dining room to set everything up. So the lighting may not be quite as good, and I apologize for that. So I'm just scumbling on here, just some basic shapes. And really what I'm doing, I'm using a filbert brush and just going into some blue greens and some kind of more lime greens, and I'm just scumbling on some basic tree formations and just a lot of other little odds and ends kind of happening here in the background. A lot of this is going to get covered up from our little couple that I'm going to be painting on here, but I wanted to kind of give an indication of kind of a really hazy, kind of blurry background here of sort of like a little city and a little park scene. So I'm just adding just a little bit of paint to the brush, and I'm really just letting the canvas sort of pull the paint off the brush as I move along here. And so I'm just trying to soften kind of as I go. And this is really just more or less a dry brush technique, and adding very small amounts of paint, and then just kind of really scrubbing it on the canvas and trying to keep everything very soft. Now I can go back with my airbrush a bit and kind of haze on a little bit of a light shaft here of sun that I want to kind of simulate. So, and that'll also help to create that that kind of haziness, and really push those tree formations kind of back a little bit more distant. And the idea is really just to keep this really kind of muted and definitely a little blurry. And not a whole lot of detail or anything like that, because it really can't compete with what's going to be happening in the foreground. So now I'm just going back again. I'm just kind of highlighting a little bit brighter color, a little more saturation, and now I can bring in my large foreground tree, and this is just pure black here. So it's a fairly simple palette to begin with, specifically with the background underpainting. So get this kind of laid in really fast here with a midnight black is the color of this particular black here. And things are going to be fairly in shadow here in the foreground. Most of the light source, of course, is going to be highlighting everything there in the background. So from this point on, I can just sort of add a little bit more fine touches and finishing touches. I can lighten a few things up. I'm just kind of adding a little bit of color now, a little bit of umber, a little bit of sienna, and just kind of splattering on a little bit of color so that that it's just not that dark grayish background completely. And that'll just kind of continue to give that illusion that there's a lot of things in the background, a lot of objects, but they're really blurry, and that way it'll just kind of help with creating that illusion. So using my airbrush again, I wanted to bring in some of the foreground flower petals. So this tree is going to have, it's going to be kind of blooming with flowers, but they're also kind of falling from the tree. And so I really wanted to kind of keep that, the most foreground, very kind of hazy and blurry, as well as the background. That way everything's really kind of focused on sort of that mid-ground with the couple sitting on the park bench. Okay, so I'm using a small filbert brush here now, and I've mixed together some umber and some sienna, a little orange, and I'm just kind of adding little jagged marks here. This is going to simulate the bark on the tree. And I'm not really overly concerned about the color right now. I'm going to go ahead and give this a nice little glaze, and that'll help to desaturate some things and darken some things, and I can go back with another glaze, which is going to be of burnt sienna, and that'll really help to bring in a little bit more reddish brown. But now I'm just using pure black, and I'm kind of going over that initial glaze that's helping to knock back the saturation and kind of gray some things out a little bit. But it's still going to be transparent enough that it is still showing some of that detail on the underpainting. This is me glazing on some of that sienna now, so you can see how it kind of reddens things up a bit. And I'm going back here with my liner brush, and I'm just adding some dark lines as if to really detail out some of the that bark, some of those dark lines between the bark. Giving it another nice glaze now. Again, this is all still in acrylic. At the end, I'll use some oil paint, and I'll let you know when I change palettes. But for the beginning phase of all this, I wanted to get it all worked in with acrylic paint. Try to work kind of fast here. So I mixed together a little gold color with orange and yellow and white, and I can do a little bit of a sun glow here now and kind of highlight that with a little bit of a silver lining. Now we're just going to create some individual leafing here. These are going to be leaves that are much closer now in the foreground, so I'm going to give it a little bit more detail, and the leaves are going to be a little bit broader. And now we can really kind of start to work out some of the blossoms. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in some of this dark color. This is kind of a dark, kind of blackish green, is going to be kind of my my silhouette here of dark color. And as that's kind of drying, I'm just going through and I'm kind of refining some of the highlights in the background, letting that dry a bit. And now I can come in with these blossoms. So I've mixed together a little bit of blue, a little bit of orange, since they complement each other. They're opposites on the color wheel. So it's a really good way to desaturate and gray out your colors by using complement colors on top of each other. That'll help to mute that color. So this is going to be our base color of kind of a peachy orange for the flower, and to get that in here and let it get kind of dry. As it's drying, I'm adding a little bit more brighter leaves now, kind of around. Now I'm coming back, now this is dried, and I've lightened up that peachy orange with a little bit of titanium white, and I'm just kind of dotting on a little bit of detail here, and that'll give sort of the indication that these are kind of some tree blossoms that are blooming. And coming back with some pure white to kind of give it a silver lining. This is going to be most directly under the sun source, so it's going to be kind of the brightest point of the painting. And I'll even come back with some pure white and add some more leaves with some pure white, as if those leaves are the ones that are being struck the brightest by that sun glow. Adding a little bit brighter oranges and peaches now, just kind of refining this. making sure I'm kind of skipping around here. It's not going to all be completely lit up, just a little bit portions here and there. I can bring in some more silver lining with my titanium white, and keeping this again really pure in color and form, and just kind of using pure white. So I've gone ahead and drawn in our little couple. I just want to get this blocked in really quickly. I've mixed together a nice dark gray using umber and ultramarine blue, and I can come through here real quickly and just sort of get the basic shapes and forms. I'm trying to really kind of go with some really good mid-tone values. So these aren't my lightest, they're not my darkest, they're just kind of in the middle of the color, and get that kind of worked in here. And since this is being underpainted in acrylic, I'll go through and give it a couple coats of paint because I want to get rid of some of those brush strokes, but I need to allow it to dry completely before I add some other layers, and it shouldn't take too long, really, being acrylic. So I went ahead and already just blocked in that park bench, and I didn't show it on the video because frankly it's just not very easy to get those nice straight lines when I'm trying to video that. It's easier to remove the canvas off of the easel, and I took it into my kitchen where I've got a large kind of island, and I can lay it down on that surface, get my ruler out, and I can really paint these on with the straight edge ruler and making sure that I'm getting those nice straight lines. And it's just not very easy to film that. So but it's really just a block in. It's really just a basic block in. I used some of my black gesso to block that in, and I like using the black gessos because they've got really strong pigment and they cover the surface very well. I'm trying to cover up all that background because I'm painting right over it, and so we want to get a good covering, and I can do it in one go. I don't have to do multiple layers, and that's just the beauty of using these gessos. So it's a black gesso with some really good pigment to cover. Now I'm going back now, and I'm just adding a little bit of paint, which is burnt umber, a little bit of blue, and kind of created this brownish gray tone, and I'm going right over that gesso, but I'm doing it kind of more like skimming. I'm allowing a lot of that gesso to show through because I wanted to kind of create some sort of age on these kind of wooden bench slats. And so by keeping the color sort of transparent and not adding too much to the brush, I'm able to kind of skim it on, and it kind of starts to appear almost kind of weathered and a bit of wood grainish in texture. So now I can come through here and kind of start adding some of the silver lining highlights, using kind of yellow and white kind of mixed together, and using some pure white in certain areas, but I'm being kind of sparing on using the pure white. You don't want to just use too much, it'll really overpower the painting, so I typically will use it quite sparingly when I do use the pure white. But since this is right under the sun source, I wanted to make sure it's nice and bright. And so I'm just going through here now and kind of just adding a lot of these highlights and just kind of working as I go, working from the top and then working my way down. That way I'm not smudging any paint, my hand's out of the way, and I can just bring this in here pretty quickly, let it dry, and then I can add a couple other coats. So all this will just get blocked in with this initial sort of kind of like phase one approach to this couple on the park bench, because I'm going to go back and use oil paint here in a little bit and go over a lot of what I've done here right now. So I don't need to go with a whole lot of detail, but I want to kind of approximate a lot of the basic mid-tone values with the acrylic and make sure my brush strokes are all smooth and kind of removed. Add a couple different coats if I need to, make sure there's a good covering so that none of the underpainting showing through. Let that dry, shouldn't take too long, and then I can come back and change my palette to oil. But still working here on the park bench and getting these extra it's really more of a silhouette, honestly, and I'm using a lot of the underpainting, looking at my negative space, and that's helping me to kind of form out this bench. And there's going to be some of this kind of these highlights here, but I'm just jumping around here and really let that underpainting work for you. You don't need to kill it all. All right, so back with the airbrush, wanted to get a little bit of a halo effect around the elderly lady's head. Her hair is going to be really lit up. She's actually directly below the sunlight, and so she's going to be lit up quite dramatically here. And I thought I would just kind of bring in a little bit of little sunspots, a little bit more glowing there in the background. And now I can come back here and really begin to work out some of these petals. And so I've just started I mixed together a little bit of red, a little bit of orange, a little bit of umber, and mixed in just a little bit of black with that too, a little bit of titanium white to help to opaque it a little bit. And just add this all on. Now I'm going to get a glaze over this, so I'm not overly concerned about the color. I'm just kind of getting a little bit of closeness to the color that I want, but since I'll glaze over it, it's going to really change the coloration here quite a bit. But really the key is, let's just get this kind of thrown in here real quick. Here's my first glaze. I'm just using burnt sienna, and you can see how that kind of warms some things up and kind of reddens it a little bit in tone. So get that in here glazed, and I'm glazing on some black now. And what I'm using is a color called bone black, and bone black is it's actually a transparent black. It works really nicely, and I can get some of those shadows in. And now I get that dry completely, and then I can come back now and start adding some highlights. And so I've mixed together sort of a yellowish orange color, and I can start jumping around here. But notice I'm making sure I'm still using a lot of my underpainting. I'm just kind of spacing out a little more and skipping around a little bit, but I want to start to get that glow started. So I'll just start with this kind of mid-range sort of highlight, and then I can go into my shadow region and kind of use some cooler colors, some umbers and blues, with my oranges, and I can also in that shadow region kind of come out with some more detail a little bit, which is what I'm doing right here. So you can see it's a little cooler, a little bluer, and that'll help to kind of establish that illusion that that's kind of a shadow here from our little couple on the park bench. So then coming back, adding a little bit more oranges now. I'm going to kind of jump around, adding oranges, some more yellows, some gold colors, and then eventually I'll come back and add some pure white as again another silver lining, right kind of underneath that park bench and between their feet. So here's where I'm coming back with some pure white, and I really just want to get that to really pop now. But see, I'm using it really sparingly. I'm just kind of skipping around. It's just helping as more of an accent color without overusing it, and that's kind of the key there, is to be a little more cautious. So now I'm kind of glazing over a little bit more dark bone black here over that shadow area once again. Now here's some petals that are kind of starting to fall from the tree, so these kind of are in mid-fall. And that just kind of added a little bit of interest here with the couple that are sitting down on a nice spring day in the inner city park or something, just kind of enjoying each other. So now at this point, I've switched to my oil palette. And the reason I wanted to do this is because I wanted to capitalize on the longer drying time and the ability to really blend very well. And so I'm definitely still using some of that underpainting acrylic. It's going to help me a lot, and I'll still let some of that show through. But I can really begin now to kind of do a bit of a wet on wet technique and start to form out a lot of the highlights and midtones with the oil palette. So we'll get this kind of worked in here. What I'll do is I'll start on the gentleman from the top of his head down to the heels of his feet. And that again will help me to ensure that my hand's out of the way. It's not going to be smudging any paint. My hand is resting on the canvas on top of our little lady here, and since she's in acrylic right now and she's completely dry, that's not even a problem for me to do this. But that's kind of the method behind the madness, since I'm a right hand, and that'll help me to just ensure that everything is not getting smudged. And so I've kind of mixed some flesh tones here a little bit. My go-to flesh tones are usually going to be Van Dyke Brown or Burnt Sienna. I like Van Dyke Brown a little bit more. I think it's a little bit bolder and darker, but a Van Dyke, Ultramarine Blue, Cad Red, Cad Orange. I'm sorry, Cad Red, Cad Yellow. I don't need orange because I can mix my yellow and my red together. And Titanium White. So those are the 5 colors I typically use and can achieve most skin tones with that. And I just kind of pre-mix it on my palette. So I've kind of mixed out here also this bit of this gray. This is really more of umber with a little bit of blue and just a teeny bit of titanium to help opaque it. And I can just start to build these wrinkles out, these folds in his jacket, and again adding more of that silver lining now. But this technique I think really works nicely. I've tried different methods over the years on painting human forms, painting portraits. And I've kind of settled on this way where I can typically underpaint everything in midtones with my acrylic palette, let that dry, and then go over it with oils and really use a lot of the underpainting, watching my negative space, and start to form out this oil on top of this acrylic, and use the drying time to soften things up. And I think that's really the key. Don't have the hard edges, don't have the brush marks, unless you want them, of course. I tend to try to go toward a little bit more realism if you want to be a little bit more artsy about it. And you want that, that's fine. But with this technique, this really helps to soften things and kind of help me to achieve more of a bit of a realism here and not so impressionistic. All right, so in all honesty, I'm not being overly concerned about my color here either. I'm trying to just sort of match it a little bit, but I'm going to go back with some glazes on top of this. Now, when I glaze with acrylic, it's a little different. I'm not using any medium. I'm just using the acrylic paint and water. And I'm usually mixing it, 40-60, 50-50, but it's pretty watered down, and it's also very transparent. But since I'm working in a oil paint now, I can't go back and glaze with acrylics. You just can't ever put acrylic on top of oil. You can only put oil on top of acrylic. It just binds better that way. So I've been asked that, how can you paint with both? Well, you can, but it really matters on ensuring that you are going on top of acrylic with your oils. But when I glaze with oil, now that I've added or am adding oil currently to our little couple here, what is going to happen is I'm going to use Liquin. And you can either use Liquin Original. There's a couple different Liquins you can try. There's a Liquin Fine Detail. So you can even use Alkyd. It's all kind of the same, but I'll mix my oil paint with the Liquin and keep it very transparent, and I can glaze over that as well. And when I do add the glaze, it's going to be a dark glaze. I'm going to mix my Van Dyke brown with some ultramarine blue, and that'll be my dark glaze. And I'll tend to maybe add a little bit more to the blue hue over the Van Dyke, just because it'll help to keep it kind of cool, and since that's going to be in shadow, a lot of their back, of course, is going to be facing away from the sun source, so it's going to be more in shadow. Okay, so we're going to let him dry for a while now, and I'll play with him a little bit later, but I think for the most part we've kind of laid him out fairly well. But we can work on our little woman here. And so what I'm doing here is I'm actually adding acrylic paint. So I've gone back to my acrylic palette because I wanted to bring in a little bit of detail with her hair and let it dry really quickly so that I can glaze over it. And this is a common technique I use when I'm making fur or hair or whatever. But see, I'm coming back now with a little bit more of burnt umber and a little bit of black, and I'm kind of desaturating that. And now I've come back to my oil palette. So I let that completely dry. I wanted to get that initial sort of layer of acrylic paint blocked in, and then I wanted to kind of gray it out with a bit of a glaze, let that dry. Coming back to my oil paints now, and I can come in with some titanium white, a little bit of gold that I've mixed together with orange and yellow, and kind of start to create this little halo effect that's going to be happening around her head. Some of her hairs are kind of sticking out in the wind a little bit, so I'm kind of working that out. A little bit of her jawline, and then I'm coming back with my different rigger brushes. I've got a couple I'm using for the fine work, and this is, of course, I'm using a small filbert brush to lay in some of this detail and oil as well. I really like these filbert brushes. It's a really big go-to brush for me because it softens paint so well. And so I'm just adding little minute bits of paint. I'm kind of moving it around with the brush. I'm letting the canvas kind of remove it off of the bristles of the head of the brush as I'm moving along, and I'm kind of softening as I go. Get some of that sun glow in now, and now I can start to add a little bit of shadow. So again, we kind of start with our midtones. We're going to go some lighter values. We'll go knock it back a little bit with some darker tones here, get some shadowing in. I'm using umber and sienna for a lot of her, kind of the pattern in her jacket that she's wearing here. And then I can start kind of moving down her body just like I did with the gentleman. That way, again, my hand's going to be out of the way. I'm not smudging anything. And that's kind of the method to the madness here. But you can see how going and using the oils, you just can't really do this with acrylic paint too well. It just dries incredibly fast, and you just don't have the luxury of really being able to work the paint and blend the paint the way I like to. So it's just much nicer to run to the oil palette here, and I can kind of capitalize on the virtues of both mediums in this painting. And I do that pretty often in a lot of my work, is just paint mixed medium and kind of use both. But this is much brighter than it needs to be. Again, I'm going to come back now here pretty soon after I bring this all in, let it dry overnight. I'm using fast drying oils. I'm using Alkyd oil paints. They dry pretty much by the next day. They're touch dry to the point that I can go in and add my glazes and keep kind of working them. And so that's what I'll do. I'll lay this initial color in, and then we're going to come back and we're just going to darken everything with some glazes, and that'll help to really bring in that shadow and really help with some contrast between those highlights and the sun glows and that shadow region. So I'm just kind of bringing in some bright yellow here. This is my sun glow that's kind of translucent. You can kind of see kind of the shape of her calves there, glowing, kind of blocking some of that glowing fabric because she's sitting right under that sun source. So bring in a little bit of umber here. We're going to kind of darken this part of her leg here. You know, it's going to be a lot of silhouette, and we'll just work that in really quickly. And I'm about to the point here now where I can leave the couple alone. I can work on other things. I'll let it dry for 24 hours, and then I'll come back the next day and we can begin some glazing. Now a lot of this here so this is really the next day now, and I'm coming back to those glazes I mentioned. I'm kind of darkening some things up, and so I'm using just a real simple sort of angle brush here. But you can really see how this glaze really helps. It really starts to knock that color back and really bring in some of those nice shadows, but it also retains all of that underpainting. And you just want to make sure those glazes are very transparent. Don't use opaque colors. Use very transparent colors. And that's what I'm kind of doing here now. So get in here and we'll kind of darken everything up on the bench and on the people, improve those shadows quite a bit, and really just kind of brings everybody to life here. And for the most part, that really kind of finishes our people off. And, you know, I did add a little bit more shadowing here underneath the bench with some of those stretched shadows that are kind of receding away from the park bench and from the people sitting there. I wanted to darken those up a little bit more closer to their body. And then I'm adding just a little bit more highlights to her hair now. And that way it creates a lot of depth into her hair. Yeah, so we're about finished here now. I can go ahead and I can sign my name. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I hope this has been helpful for you. Please subscribe if you've not done so. Please share the video if you enjoyed it, and hopefully some of the things that I've discussed today might be useful for you as you do your painting as well. And I'll look forward to coming back here real soon with another hopefully exciting painting, something different and unique. But thank you again so much for joining me, and hopefully you can join me again next time. Until next time, so long.